This
stands for
conference will now
extract,
be recorded.
transform, and load. Okay, so whenever you are getting any data from customer applications, okay, the application could be any source system. They might send you flat files. You might get data from some tables. Okay, you might get data from web applications. You might get data from Hadoop file system. Okay, so there would be heterogeneous source system. You can get data from any of the source. So you have to take that particular data, transform it as per your target system. Target system could be, you might load this particular data into a data warehouse, okay, which might be used for further analytical process. So there are other analytical or reporting tools which may use the data that we are populating into those data warehousing tables for their business decisions and everything, right? So our works comes into picture for transforming the data once we receive it from source, and we have to transform our data as per the target audience. Okay, whichever is our target audience. It could be a database, it could be a data warehouse, it could be a flat file, whether you might publish data to some web application. Okay, so there are different sources and target that an Ab Initio tool works with. Okay, so when we start our course, in first class, generally we go through these 4 topics. First is data warehousing concepts. So since we'll be working on data warehouse, right? We'll be taking data from any of the source system. It might be file or table or any other application, and we load data into our target data warehouse from where our data is being used, right? So we should be aware what a data warehouse is, right? I cannot directly start and I can tell you that if I give you a table and load the data into this table, you can load the data, but you won't be aware why are we loading that particular data. What schema are you using into data warehouse, right? What is data warehouse used for? So we'll quickly go through all those concepts. What is ETL? Okay, when I say ETL, what are the steps that ETL follows? Okay, why do we transform our data? What do we mean by extract, transform, and load? So we'll have a quick introduction on that. Then we'll be introduced to Ab Initio. What is Ab Initio as an ETL tool? Okay, because see, there are hundreds of ETL tool into market now, right? So what is Ab Initio? Why do we use Ab Initio? What is its benefit over other ETL tools, right? Because of which is it is so much of popular into bigger organizations or bigger clients. So if you anytime search about Ab Initio, you will be having all the leading banks, all the leading retail sector, insurance sector, right? All of them are using Ab Initio. So why do they go to Ab Initio? Why don't they use any other ETL tool? Other ETL tools are also being used, but the customer base is a bit small. Okay, why is Ab Initio costly? Even if it is costly, why are customers moving to Ab Initio? We'll see all of that, right? So that will cover our point number 4, why we use Ab Initio over other ETL tools. Okay, then what is the Ab Initio architecture that is being followed? Okay, then once we go through the architecture, you will get to know about these terms: GD, cooperating system, EME, graph, DMLs, transformations, right? So into Ab Initio architecture, we'll see the relationship between these 3 components of Ab Initio. Then from point number 7, our practical implementation starts. Okay, so in first 2 classes, we'll be covering all of these theory topics, and from point number 7, that means from your 3rd class, we'll start with the practical implementation. And whenever we are implementing anything practically, first we'll discuss about its theoretical part. What are we using? Why are we using that particular component? How should you understand like which component to use in which particular problem solution, right? So we'll discuss all those things. Okay, so first we'll see how do we set up a connection, okay, from Ab Initio to cooperating system or our native operating system. Then from topic 8, actual implementation of Ab Initio starters. Okay, so we'll have a quick introduction of all the Ab Initio components. Quick introduction, that means in 15 to 16 minutes we'll see what are the components those are available into Ab Initio GD, and what is their basic functional use. Okay, so we won't go into deep because we'll be discussing all those components in this subtopics. So all the checked lines are the components those are available into Ab Initio. Okay, so we'll discuss this all components. So on a quick introduction, partition is basically whenever you want to process huge data into a parallel fashion. So if you are getting suppose 10 million records and you want to process them into 1 million records chunk, okay, so you can process all of those 10 million records into 10 chunks parallelly. So these are the components that we use to basically divide our data into those chunks, right? So we'll have deep dive into all of these components. So we have partition components, then departition components. We have sorting functionality into Ab Initio. The transformation components are the most important components because all of our coding that we do into Ab Initio, we do into these components, right? So whenever we go to these components, we'll be having our practical implementation, like how do we implement it into live projects? If you are working on any project, how should you use these components? How are these components working in the background? Okay, so what are you doing into Ab Initio? You are configuring these components, but how do you know, like in the backend, how does these components work? Okay, whenever a record comes, how does this component runs? How does it transform the data that is coming into your component, right? So these are the components, those are available into Ab Initio. Okay, we'll be using these components on a daily basis. We'll be developing some graphs like we do into our live projects. Okay, so first we'll start with small components, small graphs, and slowly and steadily, when you are comfortable with Ab Initio, we'll be increasing the complexity as well. Okay, so we won't directly go to a complex scenario and start on that, and so that you don't lose motivation to learn anything, right? So we'll go step by step. We won't directly go to roof. We'll climb the stairs one by one. And when you reach the roof, if you see below, you will be having all the concepts aligned with you. Okay. No need to create any Ab Initio notes. I'll be giving you the notes at the end of our classes. Once we are done with our course, we'll be having some 2 or 3 mock sessions where I'll be telling you what are the questions that are being used into interviews. How should you answer those questions, right? How do you know what is the expectation of an interviewer when he starts his interview, right? So at the end of our classes, once we complete our course, 1 or 2 classes we'll keep in buffer for that. Okay, I'll give you interview questions, their answers, how should you answer those questions, right? We'll discuss all of those. Then we have some lookup files and lookup functions. So we'll be seeing how should we use predefined Ab Initio functions into the transformations that we are using. Okay, we'll go through that. Then these are some miscellaneous components that are available into Ab Initio. Once you start working with your database components, what are the database components available into Ab Initio? How should you use those components? Okay, we'll be seeing all of that. And then we have dataset components to read and write our input or output into a particular file. If you want to write it into multiple files or read it from multiple files, we'll go through that. How do we do that? If there is any need to transfer files between servers, right? How do you do that? From a component, from a Unix command. Okay, we'll go through that. Then there are some validation components. Okay, once we are done with point 8, so the point 8 is the topic that will take a longer time. It will take somewhere between 8 to 12 classes. Okay, because this is your core Ab Initio. Okay, once you are done with this, only thing will be practical implementation and practical scenarios that you will be getting into your projects. Okay, so from point number 9, okay, these are the live scenarios that we'll be practicing. Okay, so 9 and 10 is the most important thing. If you go to any ETL background, may it be Ab Initio, Informatica, Hadoop, anything, right? So whenever you are working with data warehousing, you should know what is CDC, what is SCD, what are the types of SCD, and how to implement them into Ab Initio. Once you have created these two graphs, you are ready for interviews. Okay, basic Ab Initio interviews. Okay, then on theoretical part, we'll also discuss what is meta programming, how do you generate any code on runtime. Okay, so the language that we use is for this purpose is parameter definition language, which we call as a PDL or meta programming. Okay, so what are the functions, key types, and code that is being used into PDL? We'll discuss all of that. Then Ab Initio not only provides us GD, but with GD it provides some additional functionality. Okay, and then there are some other tools as well into the Ab Initio framework. So consider Ab Initio as a framework. Okay, or so you will be having plans. So how should you run your graph in a sequential manner? Like once graph 1 is completed, then graph 2 should run. Graph 2 is completed, then graph 3 should run. And if graph 2 fails, then graph 4 should run. Okay, so all of that planning we do into plans and we call it conducted. Okay, conducted is the name, and what we create into conducted is plans. So as you can, any layman person can understand, plans means what is my plan to run my graph for building a particular application. So we'll see the components available for plan, that is subplan, graph task, conditional task. What are the methods that we use or write into plans? What are the, how do we loop anything into our plan? Okay, whether you want to loop any graph or a script, how do you do that? Okay, then for live projects, we'll also have introduction for continuous flows. So until topic 11, okay, or 12, everything is batch mode. So whatever we are doing, it will happen in a batch. What do we mean by batch? Batch is something, once you start it, it start processing the data. As soon as the data ends, my processing stops. Okay, when I say continuous flows, it will run 24/7. And as soon as it received any data, any record from input, it will process it. Okay, it will give you an output. So until and unless you manually go and kill this particular process, it won't kill itself. It will keep running 24/7, 35 days. Okay, then we'll have a quick introduction to web services. How does Ab Initio takes data from any of the web application? How do you process the data once you receive it from any of the web services? And if you want to push some data back to some web application, how do we do that? Okay, and then also at the end of our course, we'll also discuss about Hadoop components. Okay, and what is Hadoop? Okay, we'll have a quick introduction into one class. Okay, how do we use Hadoop components? How do we connect to any of the Hadoop server? And how do we create transformation based on the Hadoop data that we receive? Okay, because this Hadoop data, your web services data, won't be in a flat format. Like in Hadoop, we would use different kind of HDFS system, right? You can store your file into Parquet format, into Avro format, right? There are different formats available into Hadoop. So once you start processing data from your Hadoop, what are the commands that we use to process the data? What is the component that we use to process the data? All of that we'll discuss. And at the end of the course, I'll give you some project or scenarios with some case studies. If you build that particular case study, start for interviews. Okay, so after topic 8, I'll start giving you interview questions as well, because we'll be covering the components. Okay, and then what we'll cover is the scenarios or practical implementation that comes into our live projects. Okay, so these are the 15-16 topics that we discuss into our Ab Initio course, and it will make you ready to go to any interview, crack the interview, and once you get into a project, you can start working on it. Okay, so there won't be any problem like how should I start, what is the concept, I don't know any concept, whether you are an experienced person or a fresher, right? So once you join with any of the project and if you show some experience into that project, you can already start working on Ab Initio. Okay, so be sure of that you will be able to work on Ab Initio after this course. Okay, also I'll be sharing this help file with you guys. So here you can find about any of the component, read about that particular component, how does that component work. Okay, so no need to create any of the nodes. So once you get this help file, you will be having everything at one place. Whenever you want to read about any component, anything, you can directly open this help file onto your system and you can search that component. It will give every information regarding to that component. Okay, you can check what are the parameters available into an input file component, what are the accesses that we use, right? How do we use that particular file, and everything you will get over here. Okay, so there is no need to create any of the notes, or you don't have to worry about the theoretical portion. You will have it documented with you, complete Ab Initio guide. Okay, so what you guys need to focus is once we discuss any component, once we create some scenarios into class, every day I am giving some 3 or 4 scenarios based on that component to all of my students. And whoever is practicing that component, he does not get any of the questions or any of the problem into coming classes. Okay, or even if he implements the case studies at the end of our classes. Okay, so our course run into a 70-30 model, 70% practical, 30% theory. Okay, and whenever you are doing or implementing any practical scenario, be sure that you won't forget it. If you are reading it theoretically, you will read it on day 1, you will forget it on day 3. But if you are implementing it, if you are facing some issues, facing some errors, if you are resolving it by yourself or by talking to me or any of your colleagues, then you won't forget it. And since you guys are working, you already know this, right? Once we start working on any technology, if you are practicing it daily, you will never forget it. Okay, for our training purpose, we use operating system 2.15, which is available for training purpose. So I'll give you this virtual machine. Okay, it has Ab Initio installed on it. Okay, so no need to install anything. You will just have to install the VMware. You can open this virtual machine and you can start practicing Ab Initio on it. Okay, so currently in our projects we use Ab Initio version 3 and above based on the client requirement, whatever client suggests. Okay, or whatever licensing he has taken, but everything will be same apart from some of the look and feel changes. But whenever we are going through the class, I'll make sure that you are also aware of GD version 3 and above. Okay, how do we use components into above the version which are above this on which we are practicing. Okay, there are somewhere some here and there changes, nothing much. The component works as is that we are working. Okay, there won't be any change. Just one parameter will be added or one parameter will be removed, but that will be seeing into our classes. Okay, so these are some of the scenarios that we are implementing into our batch that is currently going on, right? So first we have gone through all these components and then we start creating these graphs. Okay, also we are using some of the transformation. Okay, so slowly and steadily we have started increasing the complexity. Okay, how do we use these components, how do we configure these parameters which are available into our component, and how do we use them. Okay, so currently in the batch that is going on, none of the person is from Ab Initio background. Okay, but they are able to execute this transform, they are able to use the functions available into Ab Initio, They are able to write transform on their own. Okay, so they do write these transformations easily, and you will also be able to do it. Okay, so once I provide you this virtual machine, it will have Ab Initio Ab Initio help file from previous version as well as the new version. Okay, how do we fire Ab Initio commands? How do we create DMLs? How do we create source files, right? So you will get to know everything that is required into your live projects.
Sir, which database we can configure here? Teradata, SQL, or some?
So currently SQL is connected to this, but every database will work same on Ab Initio. Database will be used just to extract the data from your table and just to populate data into your table. Rest all the transformation that we'll be using will be into Ab Initio only. Okay, but whenever we are going through this course, Ab Initio course, right? So parallelly, you will have to prepare Teradata and Unix. Okay, because only Ab Initio won't work. Okay, so into your database side, you won't have to work much. You will have to just understand basic queries. How do you select data? How do you delete data? If you want to write a join query, there are some basic database knowledge that is required. Okay, because everything that we are doing, we do it on Ab Initio GD or Ab Initio mapping. Okay, whatever you are writing, you will write it into Ab Initio. Okay, you will use your tables just to fetch the data or just to load the data. Okay, and once you are loading your data, for checking whether you have loaded your correct data, whether it is expected or not, you will go and fire some queries onto your Teradata, SQL, or Oracle, and all of the queries are same. There is no syntactical changes into any of the databases. Some keywords here and there, some commands will change a little bit. Okay, so that doesn't matter which database you are working on. Okay, then into Unix, you should have some knowledge about basic Unix command. So I'll share that file with you, okay, which has all the basic commands, all the basic concepts that are required for Unix scripting. Okay, so that will be an additional effort that you will have to put. Okay, Ab Initio wise, I'll make sure you are confident going into any interview. But on Unix side, I'll tell you the list of commands which are being asked into interviews. Since I am an interviewer myself, okay, what do we expect from a candidate? Okay, how the candidate should answer. So we'll go through in the end, we'll go through all of these concepts, but we'll go to it when you are completely ready with all the scenarios that we are discussing into our class, all the scenarios that I'm giving you for practicing, right? And all the case studies that we are creating. Once you are through that, you will through from the interview. Okay, so there won't be any issue clearing any of the interview. Okay, so as a fresher, if you go to some interviews, obviously there will be some rejections in the beginning, one or two rejections, right? Even if you are prepared, but what does an interviewer looks into a candidate, you will slowly get to know what are they expecting from you. Okay, we'll go through the resume building sessions as well on some day. How what should you write into your resume if you are going for an Ab Initio developer position, right? Whatever you write into your resume, whichever project you mentioned, right, they ask questions based on that. So once we are preparing with any of the interview, right, or once we are preparing our resume, what have you written into your resume? Based on that, I'll ask questions to you. If you are able to answer those questions, be sure that going ahead into interviews, you will start cracking those. Okay, so I provide you this software, okay, this VMware, where you can have this Ab Initio help file that we were seeing onto my local system in the beginning. This is the GD that we are using, the components available, right? We'll start using these components, right? See, these are some of the graphs that we have started creating into our batches. We'll go through all the Ab Initio concepts, like what are the phasing, what are the subgraphs, That all comes into the components which I have listed into that PDF file. Okay, once we start discussing those components, we'll see how do we create subgraph by using some components, how do we create a complete graph, how do we create a plan. We'll discuss all of that stuff. Okay, so I'll give you a Google Drive link to install that particular VMware and this virtual machine. Once you start working on your virtual machine, you can practice Ab Initio. Okay. Also, I'll be providing you this. Sorry, I have opened. So this Excel sheet has Ab Initio architecture, the basic commands, the basic concepts, basic terms that we use into Ab Initio. Then we have some commands that we use into Ab Initio. What are tags? What are the commands that we use for creating tag, listing the objects into a tag? What are the lookup functions that we used for transformation? What are the string function? What is the parallelism techniques that we use into Ab Initio? How do we increase the performance of any Ab Initio graph and other stuff like this? Okay, so I'll be sharing these documents as and when needed once we start with our course. Okay, so you won't get everything on day one. You won't get you won't be missing any document at the end of the class. Okay, also recorded sessions will be provided. If anyone misses any class, okay, he can go through those recorded session. If he or she has any doubt, you can directly write it to me on my email and I'll be answering those. Okay, if you are working on any of the scenario, if you get any doubt, write me an email. I'll make sure you get the response on that day only. Okay, so that you aren't practicing or you are stopped practicing because you are stuck in somewhere. Okay, so clear with the course content that we'll be covering. Swapnali, Vijay,
Yes.
okay. Do you have any
Yes, sir.
questions or any concern regarding this training program, or if you are expecting something apart from these content, you can tell me and we'll see how can we cover those topics as well. Okay, if you want to go through Unix as well,
So can you read
we'll,
Unix? Yeah,
yes,
sorry.
I'll take an additional class for Unix. Okay, that will be apart from our Ab Initio course. Okay, so at any of the weekend, generally I take trainings from Monday to Friday, but at any of the weekend, whenever we are comfortable, we'll schedule a class where we'll be discussing the Unix commands, Unix scenarios that are being asked into interviews, or Unix shell scripting. How should you proceed with your shell scripting knowledge as well? Okay, so we can anytime have that sessions. If once we cover some topics from Monday to Friday, right? You have these 5 days, you will be covering some scenarios, you will be building your graphs. Okay, at any point of time, if you want explanation on any of the component, right, we'll accumulate few of the topics, and after 2 weeks bi-weekly weekend session we can take, Okay, at any of the day, if you are comfortable for 1.5 hours, and we can discuss whatever we have discussed into those 5 days, and how should you proceed with those components if you want to build any complex graph or a bigger graph. But that will be completely conditional. If you are having any doubts that are not being cleared, okay, even if after practicing, if you have any questions, right, so those kind of thing we'll keep for bi-weekly sessions, because we'll be completing this course into somewhere around 30 days. Okay, so weekend session we can plan as and when required. Okay, based on your doubts, if anything more has to be explained, or if we are missing our weekly target, the topics that we want to cover, if we are lagging behind, sometimes we'll have those kind of sessions. Okay, but generally that doesn't happen. We don't lag on our topics. Okay, so as and when students ask me, sir, we want a weekend batch for 1 or 2 hours, we want to clear some of our doubts, we want to ask some further questions on those, we take it. So I don't have any problem spending my time with my students. So what my target is, once my students have completed the course, they should be able to crack the interviews, they should be able to work on any of the project if they are getting for any of the client. Okay, so I'm working into IT for last 10 years. I have worked on multiple projects. I have trained multiple batches. Okay, and my students are placed into MNCs, right? So whoever practice things which I'm explaining on that day, please take out 1 or 2 hours, start working on those concepts, read about that into help file. Okay, note down your questions, write an email to me, I'll answer it to you. Okay, and every week I'll be providing you with some documents which you should go through. You should read those documents. Okay, and then you will also not lag behind. Okay, and by the end of the course you will be able to give interviews. Okay, but the only condition is practicing. You will have to take some time out, you will have to practice whatever we are discussing into our class.